You're listening to the Resilient Author Podcast, the show that goes beyond the pages to explore the grit, courage, and resilience it takes to write and publish a book. I'm your host, Carrie Human, and each week I sit down with authors to uncover the stories behind their stories, the challenges they faced, the breakthroughs they experienced, and the wisdom they've gained along the way. Whether you're working on your first chapter or celebrating your launch, this is the place to find inspiration and practical takeaways for your own author journey. Let's dive in. So Lisa, for those who may not know you yet, what's your book about and what do you hope readers take away from it?
Okay, so I have a couple of books, but the most recent one that we're working on now is called When Your Ex Turns the Kids Against You. And I am a high conflict divorce strategist that specializes in something called legal abuse. And that's where an ex from a partnership or marriage during the separation process basically uses the legal system to wear the other person down and to bleed them dry financially. And so the current book that we're working on about turning the kids against you, that's something that we started noticing in the past few years with our clients, all of whom come from around the world, men and women, are domestic violence survivors. So these are the worst of the worst cases. Our clients say that we belong to the "my lawyer says this is the craziest case I've ever had" club. And so parental alienation, the topic of the current book, really stemmed from observations and interactions with our clients and seeing this again and again and again.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, that's definitely a heavy space to be in, but I would imagine there's a lot of people who need that support. You mentioned working with people navigating high conflict divorce. What are some of the early red flags that might indicate a separation is heading into, high conflict territory?
So in the beginning, it's kind of tricky because everybody's angry. I mean, you never imagined when you got together that you would be separating. So the difference is that in normal separation or divorce, generally people are fighting, they hate each other, they're doing bad things. But then 4 to 6 months in, the money, the bills from lawyers and everything else start piling up. And usually that's a bit of a wake up call, like, all right, it's time for us to kind of settle down and move on with our lives. High conflict cases are the opposite. The anger does not subside with one person. And so instead of being logical and thinking, okay, it's time for us to move on and do what's fair and what's right, it's I am going to destroy you no matter what. And I'm going to paint myself as the victim and you as the villain. And there's a lot of black and white thinking. So one of the indicators of high conflict separation is somebody who has some kind of personality disorder and or an addiction. So when someone has either of those two things, I'm not talking about someone who's in recovery. That's totally different. But somebody who's does not even have proper judgment. They can't think about what's best for themselves. They don't think about the consequences of their own actions, because that can contribute to high conflict separation and divorce, because they're not thinking, oh my gosh, I'm burning through our kids' college savings or anything else if I keep fighting. They're just like, nope, I will destroy you, and I don't care what happens. I don't care if the kids' lives are ruined, if we lose our home. I mean, we have several clients whose exes feel this way, but one of our clients told us that her ex said to her, I want to leave you bloodied, on your knees, begging for mercy in the street.
Wow.
And that's what's happened. And that's really, like, when I say that to other people, they're like, yeah, that's my ex too. It's like the same thing in a different way.
That really puts it in perspective. I've only been married for 2 years, and there's nothing in me that could ever imagine getting into something like this with my wife. But to your point, no one gets married thinking that they're going to get to a point where they're saying things like that.
Right.
So I imagine you probably deal with some pretty intense circumstances. I'm just curious, Lisa. Most books, begin as a spark. It's something that's just kind of pulling at you. Where did the idea for this book first come from? Was there like a particular moment or experience that really set this into motion to start talking about this?
Yeah. So I'll jump back a few years before that with our first book together with Been There, Got Out. That was my second book. It's actually my first book with my partner, Chris. And we started thinking, because I spent 10 years in the legal system with my own case. Just one of those was the actual divorce. And I was learning so much along the way, and I had wasted so much money with the initial divorce. My divorce actually cost $100,000 and took a year, and I'm paying back those bills forever. Chris, my partner's divorce took 3 years and cost $300,000. And we were like, if we could do this again, we made so many mistakes and we would never want this to happen to other people. So as we started our coaching practice, we thought, let's start putting together all of this knowledge into a book. And that became the first one, which is, I'll hold it up, Been There, Got Out, Toxic Relationships, High Conflict Divorce, and How to Stay Sane Under Insane Circumstances. That really got into what to expect as you are, well, pre and as you are going through the process with a toxic ex, and post judgment, meaning after the divorce, what you can expect. And then a lot of like practical, actionable advice of how to handle it to save as much time and money and energy as possible, while understanding that this is a long haul and it's not like some quick, easy solution to make it stop or end anytime soon. So that book came out. We did a bunch of traveling for it. And in the summer of 23, we went to the American Library Association conference in Chicago. And as we were driving to the airport at the end of the conference, I was like a little light bulb. I was like, you know what? I know the idea for our next book. I think we should do it on when an ex turns the kids against the other parent, because Chris, this is what we see all the time. It's like it's baked into legal abuse. Like, I'm so passionate about this. And I had already started interviewing people because we have a podcast, and I just naturally love talking to people and learning from them. And that's what's helped us help our clients so well, is the connection to all different kinds of resources. So I was like, all right, I'm going to start really focusing in on therapists and lawyers who have experience with this particular issue, because there's so much pain and heartbreak. And then I found out that between 20 and 22 million people in America and Canada alone suffer from this particular relationship dynamic post-separation. So I just continued doing interviews and gathering more and more information. And then we started putting the book together and a big online course that I'm still writing. And as we started like dribbling out content and little teasers and things, it was like swarms more people, not just dealing with high conflict divorce and separation, but people who had been out for a while, who felt like, I'm the only one in this situation. I'm so ashamed. I can't talk about it. They started coming and connecting with each other. We actually have a support group where we mix our men and women together, because we know that abuse is a human issue, and alienation became, it had already been, but the theme of it, like more and more people started talking about it and started feeling like a lot more validated and understood and less alone.
Mm. So I'm sure there's some people who are listening to this who hopefully aren't in this situation, but you've talked about how an abusive or high conflict partner often can't just move on after separation. Can you talk about like why does that happen, and how can understanding this actually help someone prepare and protect themselves emotionally from something
Yeah.
like this?
So I like to say that I kind of fill the gap between what attorneys are not trained to do and therapists don't understand. And the reason I say that is because lawyers are trained in logic, and the world tends to be logical. So people always think, all right, you're separating the person, you've already agreed to get the divorce. Your ex has a new partner. Why is this happening? Like, why won't they just leave you alone? Why are they still just terrorizing you? And it defies logic. And so the reason why is because somebody, let's say with a personality disorder, doesn't operate logically. And that when there's a separation, there's a deep sense of abandonment that they feel that connects to something in their childhood. And so rather than dealing with those feelings of discomfort or failure as a spouse or a partner, that's too frightening and unnerving. And so it turns into something called, you might have heard the term narcissistic rage. So it just becomes anger to mask all of those uncomfortable feelings. And the anger has to go somewhere. And so that's when it's like I just noted earlier, like they do this thing called splitting where they're like, okay, you're all bad and I'm all good. And I need to prove to the world that that's the case because I'm not going to take any accountability for doing anything wrong. And so then they create these loyalty conflicts where with the children, they'll be like, you're either with me or against me. So you can't love both me and your other parent because that's disloyal. They'll conduct things called smear campaigns where they'll try to ruin your reputation in the community. They'll try to get the friends on their side. They'll badmouth you to the school because they just can't accept that the relationship is over. And so people always say, well, but they already have a new partner. Again, like, why don't they just leave me alone? It's because if you still exist, you're a sign that something is wrong with them. Like they want to obliterate you. And especially if you go on to have a healthy new relationship, that's like triggering them because they can't stand to see you doing okay. It has to be that you're destroyed. They don't want to see any memories of their failure at that relationship. Not to blame them only, but just that this messed up. And also when that relationship ends, a lot of times for people like this, they care about appearances. And so it doesn't matter whose fault it was. But when when the household separates, like they will say like they think you're the responsible person for destroying that image of like the perfect home and the perfect family and their role as like a perfect partner. So again, you need to be punished for it. And at the same time, they want to see themselves as still desirable. So they'll when they get with a new person, often they'll tell the person, it's my crazy ex that's still coming after me. And so they'll bait you and irritate you. So you'll lash out. So it's like, oh, you see, look at the narrative. Like I told you, my ex is crazy. So all this stuff is happening in the background. Again, this is not normal. This is not what happens in most cases. But for us, tons of people are affected by it. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So you mentioned something, I think you said narcissistic rage.
Mm-hmm.
Is this considered a mental disorder or like, I only ask that because, I know if someone is considered to be insane or crazy and they commit a crime, sometimes they won't do the time because they have a mental disorder. If someone is like a narcissist at this level, does the judge see this and say this person isn't fit? Like how does that work?
No, we wish. No. So there's things that the court looks at when it comes to custody in particular. Like how do I decide which parent is okay for the child to be with?
Mm,
And so of that list, one of the custody factors is diagnosed mental illness or substance abuse. However, even if you get your ex to be diagnosed as, say, a narcissist, they're protected in this country by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Mental illness is considered a disability. So really what you need to focus on if you're trying to prove that your ex shouldn't be parenting the kid is to focus on the patterns of that person's behavior and the visible impact, the harm that it's doing to your child. But the mental illness alone is nothing. And so many people spend thousands of dollars during this process on getting what's called psych evals, psychological evaluations of their ex, because like, I'm going to get a diagnosis. And then the court's going to see that my ex is a narcissist and they're going to take the kids away. It's a total myth. And then they're like, why did I spend all this money? Like, I can't even use it. And even if an evaluator during the process diagnosed your ex as, let's say, a narcissist or borderline, that can be fought really well in court because people are like, oh, you just were hired for this very narrow issue. So your diagnosis is only for the purposes of this. And we don't even know if it's real. And we're going to get someone else to fight it. And it just is like, forget it, whatever. Let's just focus on the actual the person's actual ability to parent or not.
mm, mm. Wow. Um, I'm curious, Lisa. I know you're working on your third book now, you and your partner. What has been the biggest obstacle or doubt you faced while writing? And how did you move through that?
Um, the obstacle, my partner and I have very different styles of working.
Mm,
I tend to be more of like, we got to hit this deadline. I'm like, oh, we're both workaholics, but I'm like, we got to go, 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 go. And he is more boundaries like, okay, it's 6 o'clock. Like I'm taking a break. Stop. And so that was a bit of a struggle. I mean, Chris and I are a couple also in real life for 10.5 years. And I love doing creative projects together. But again, so I used to teach high school English. I'm a slasher of words. I'm very into like, let's tighten it up, tighten it up, tighten up. Chris is one of these people where his words are precious. And so he spends time like creating and he wants to, it's to stay beautiful. And at the beginning, our publisher, we're both New Yorkers and our publisher's from New York City. And she's one of these tiny little women with this huge personality. And she was like, I'm really sorry, but Lisa's going to be in charge of this, Chris. Like she's going to be the editor. And Chris is like, oh, my words. And he kept saying, we need to do the thing, Lise, with like tracking so I can see all of the changes. And I just was like, no, we're not. I don't want you to see like everything I'm doing. How about you can keep the original draft and I will slash and then I'll read you out loud what it sounds like. And whatever you miss, then you can go look to the draft. And of course, it worked out just fine because he didn't realize that, all his flabby words got trimmed and it ended up being really good. So I get like the personal dynamics sometimes of working with a co-author are a little bit tricky. And I understand I could be like a real pain in the butt. but yeah, just different styles. But other than that, in terms of publishing, I knew that the book would do well because we based it on the need that we saw in our community. And then the second book, I know it's also going to do well. The tricky thing with doing the second book about when you how to stay sane under insane circumstances was my first book did really well. It came out like 22 years ago, and it had nothing to do with crazy divorces or anything like that. It was about backpacking through Europe as a rite of passage. And the first printing of 10,000 sold out in 2 weeks. I was like, this is awesome. And I thought, oh, it'll be so easy to get the next book published because the first one did so well. But an obstacle was that the publishing world had totally changed. And so when we started pitching it, number one, they were like, okay, you need to make yourself an expert in divorce. Like you can't just use the past. And you have to build a whole social media platform because you have to do a lot more of the work now than you did in the past. I mean, in the past, Lonely Planet was my publisher. They're a really big name. They handled everything. I got like a little bit of royalties and that's fine. But now we use a hybrid publisher. So we do a lot more of the work, but we make more of the money and we own our content, which I like better. So I guess those are a couple of things that were really different that I didn't expect.
Yeah, I imagine 22 years ago, Amazon definitely wasn't what it is today.
No, I mean, it was still there. Like my book sold a lot on Amazon, but it wasn't the same.
And yeah, and self-publishing was probably still kind of unheard of. I mean, Lonely Planet
Yeah.
is still around, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Lonely
They do
Planet's
travel
huge.
books.
Yeah, wow. So I would love to get kind of back into the nature of your book without giving it away, but you were talking about high conflict. When dealing with a high conflict ex or someone with a personality disorder, what are some ways people can protect themselves financially and emotionally while also navigating the legal process?
Yeah, it's hard because so many times we don't even realize that we're in that situation. And the statistic is that 1 in 2 people in abusive relationships have no idea that they're in them, including me, because we often associate abuse or domestic violence with physical violence. And most domestic violence centers, I actually thought, oh, that's for battered women. And even though there was some physical violence, like I thought mine's not that bad. So I'm not even going to reach out. So I think educating oneself about the nature of domestic violence, especially something called coercive control or like all that invisible abuse, emotional, verbal, psychological, financial abuse present in like 99% of abusive relationships, legal abuse.
Financial abuse?
Yeah.
Wow, 99%?
99% of abusive relationships, there's stuff with money, hiding assets, where one person doesn't have access to the information, having to beg for an allowance. And I'm not just talking about women.
Wow.
Certain dynamics in a relationship where one partner has all the control and they'll make they often make it seem like there's no money, and they'll be like spending on whatever they want, and then the other person has no idea what's happening and is living on like, very, very little. So yeah, financial abuse. There's something called revenge porn that a lot of people don't really know what it means. Um, so that means when you are with somebody and you are saying that you want to leave, that they threaten that if you break up the relationship, that they're going to publish sexualized images of you to try to destroy you. And so that can affect your job, that can affect your family. Chris and I actually went to Barbados and we trained lawyers and domestic violence advocates there. And a lot of the people we trained talked about how that's a huge issue in Barbados because of the culture there and how families are really tight knit, and how if something happens, like the whole family could be ostracized, as well as the person's reputation and job. So that's a really, really big deal. And that is also a form of domestic violence and, abuse. So I think, first of all, like understanding the different ways that your ex is trying to control you to keep you in the relationship is important. But after that, you need to make sure you talk to an attorney and find out your legal rights. Because again, being in one of these relationships, the power dynamic is vast. And we don't realize that over time we put our trust into that other person, that we consider them an authority, and we tend to listen to them more than we listen to ourselves. And they'll often say things to us to make us feel like, if you just want to, we should do this amicably. We don't need attorneys. That I'm going to treat you really well. If you just sign here, I'll be good to you. And then they get manipulated into signing these crazy agreements without having any clue of what their legal rights are. You need to get to a neutral person and find out your legal rights in terms of the assets as well as custody, instead of just believing what your ex says, because of course they're just thinking about themselves. And another thing is recognizing, which can be so hard, that your ex is not your ally. Because in normal amicable divorce, like you can get through a divorce and people work together, but in these cases it's very, very different.
Wow. I think I'm still just caught up on the fact that you have two people who literally married each other, and at this point they pretty much want to destroy each other like that.
Well, one person, not both.
So it's generally one person.
One person wants to destroy the other person. The other person's like, let me just get away. I just want to get away. I just want you to leave me alone and let me live my life. It's not both of them.
Wow. And to your point, it's generally the person that is getting dumped, essentially.
No, not always, because,
Not
and
always.
that's like a whole other thing with like something called the discard, which is part of the cycle of a toxic relationship. So the beginning is like love bombing, where they're like, "Oh, you're amazing, you're my soulmate, etc." And then they build you up, and then there's devaluation, where once they get you, they start kind of cutting you down, and then they discard, or you discard that, or you reject them and you get away. But whatever it is, they want to always feel like they're the one in charge. And that's why after it happens, they want to prove to the world that they rejected you, not that you actually left them.
Wow. Do you think it's intentional that this is happening, or is it just kind of happening that way?
I think that with someone, again, who has like a personality disorder or an addiction, they do feel like a victim. They feel like it's happening to them, and they're lashing out and fighting because they're afraid. And again, it's that whole abandonment thing that usually ties back to when they were a child, where it's like they don't want to feel like this again, so they just fight instead, like a cornered rabid animal.
It's protection.
Yeah, exactly.
So Lisa, you've written about post-separation legal abuse. What does that actually look like, and how can someone recognize when they're caught in that cycle?
Okay, so there's really two types of legal abuse. And I always say that's fortunately and unfortunately my specialty, because I spent so many years in court dealing with it. Legal abuse is also sometimes called litigation abuse or paper abuse, because it involves so many papers being filed, motions being filed in court. And so there's really two ways that, or two types of legal abuse. The first is where your ex is constantly filing motions against you. That can be called vexatious litigation or frivolous litigation, where they will threaten to change custody, take money away from you, declare you an unfit parent, whatever it is, but they are filing stuff and you have to keep responding to it. So it's super expensive because you're often paying attorneys. You have to take time off work. A lot of people lose their jobs because of all the time that they're in court. It takes your attention away from parenting. It just consumes you. You start isolating from other people because it's like, oh my gosh, you're still in court. And you're just feeling like this is so unfair. And when is it going to end? Then on the other hand is the kind of legal abuse that I dealt with, that my lawyer for that first year of the divorce said, your ex is not going to comply with this agreement. So the burden was on me to keep going back to court and try to get enforcement of our agreement or of our orders. So again and again and again, because the courts often give people multiple chances, they don't go for harsh punishment right away. And unfortunately, failure to enforce orders emboldens people to take advantage of the system because nothing happens quickly enough. And then the burden is on us to, again, keep going back. It's the same thing, like spending lots of money if you have an attorney, taking time off work, family, relationships, and just your brain is constantly feeling like, what's the next bomb that's going to drop? And how am I going to continue living like this? And I remember suffering from awful insomnia, things like complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, like where if I would just go out to the mailbox, I'd be like scared because I kept thinking like, what's the newest thing? If I got emails with my ex's attorney's name on it, or even just court, even when it was like great orders and I got great orders often, I would just be like terrified. I would feel it up in my throat, in my shoulders, my stomach, just like really, really scared. I'd start shaking when I would read things. And this is years later, it still would happen. Even again, when I get like the most awesome orders ever, I'd be reading them scared. And then I have to have Chris read it or my dad read it and be like, am I interpreting this correctly? Or not being able to look at things. It's really, really hard. So that's what legal abuse really looks like, is just always being in court, always responding to stuff or having to initiate stuff in the legal system all the time.
Wow, that sounds like a true nightmare. Wow.
It is.
Mm. You know, I would imagine writing a book like this isn't just about the information. It sounds like there's a personal transformation that comes with it. How would you say writing this book has shaped you personally? Your confidence, your outlook, or just your sense of purpose overall?
So I think that just the experience of me being pro se or representing myself for those 7.5 out of 10 years was an amazing transformative experience because I learned so much along the way. And not only did I do well, I mean, it didn't feel like I was doing well because it took so long for justice and karma to be served, but it was served beautifully, bits and pieces along the way. But at the end of it, or not even at the very end, but towards the end of it, when my case was published as case law for the state, which is like unheard of for a self-represented litigant, that made me feel like, I mean, my background's already as a teacher and I've always been a writer. Like, I want to start putting together what I've learned because helping people makes me feel good. And also the art of creating things, like connecting to creativity, is a wonderful way to heal. So the book wasn't really just my story or Chris's story and how we succeeded. We love using stories from our clients, using information from attorneys, trauma professionals, like coaches, about like things people can do. And what's been so rewarding is not just our work with our clients, but people who haven't met us who read the book and they're like, oh my gosh, you guys totally get it. Like, I feel so validated and I want to work with you. And it's really helped us develop our community. So, yeah, I just love that feeling from the first book, and I'm already seeing it start to happen with the second book, which is really my third book that's going to be out soon.
Mm. That's amazing. You just mentioned this, but you often guide people who represent themselves in court. What's the concept of going pro se, and what are some of the benefits when it's done correctly?
Okay, and I'm glad you said when it's done correctly. When it's not done correctly, it's an absolute disaster. So one of the biggest benefits is we say it turns off the spigots. Like you are blowing money to lawyers. It is so expensive. Like one motion could be $1,000 or more dollars. Trials start at like $50,000 because lawyers have to prep stuff. So when you go pro se, you really turn those not completely off because you still need help, but you turn them so low so it stops your ex from being able to financially decimate you. But then there is learning how to do it the right way. One thing that I loved was being able to speak for myself because I know my case better than anyone. And every time I'd have a lawyer supposedly help me in what's called limited scope, like where they assisted, they would like mess up the case because they would get details wrong, they would forget things, and I had everything in here and I'm really, really organized. I can't remember what I did last weekend, but I'm super good at remembering like details and conversations and dates when it applies to my case. And so those skills like really came into play. But one of the most beautiful feelings for somebody who's a pro se and you can do it effectively is cross-examining your abusive ex on the stand
Mm.
and they have to answer you and you know how to get under their skin and you make them come out with the way that they normally are. And it's just like such a pleasure to do that properly and to have them misbehave in court and get reprimanded by a judge and then, win your case. So yeah, that was the best part of being pro se.
Wow. I'm not sure. Did you ever watch the show Suits? Did you ever get into that show?
No, I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
A good show. But just to your point, when they do the cross examination, there's scenes where the partner just gets so revved up, and the lawyer's like, no
Uh-huh.
further questions because it's all right there. You can see it. So I imagine
Yeah.
there's a lot of satisfaction in doing that.
Yeah, it really is. And it's also a way, if you structure your questions appropriately, it's a way for you to tell the story and they have to answer it in a very limited way. Like you can just tell a story by asking close-ended questions where they have to say yes or no. That's it. And then they get so frustrated because they'll be like, "Bleh," and you're like, yes or no. That's it. And so the power dynamic has totally changed because you think about how in the relationship they completely dominated you and being able to be in the position of cross-examining them yourself, it really shifts everything and it's so satisfying. And many of our clients have gone pro se and done really, really well. And they've come back and been like, it was awesome.
Wow. Is that something you all offer, like as an extra to your coaching? Like how does someone get
Yes,
that
so
coaching
that's
from
like
you?
that's like a big, we teach a number of different things and a lot of people do end up going pro se. Actually, the last statistics I saw said like 3 out of 4 litigants are pro se. This isn't just in family court because of the expense. And now with AI, supposedly in the last 6 months, there's been more pro se litigants than any other time. It's not, AI is definitely not the most effective, but it can certainly be helpful. And, but you really have to be careful with that. Um, oh my gosh, I forgot what you had just said.
No, I was just asking, and like, do you guys coach people
Oh,
with
yes, 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 yes. Sorry. So, yeah, I mean, for me as an educator, we don't give legal advice, but we teach the art of persuasion. And when I taught writing, one of my favorite topics was teaching the art of persuasive writing, which included making concessions, meaning anticipating the argument that the other side is going to throw at you and incorporating it into your own argument. So you kind of get ahead of them and it takes the wind out of their sails. And so we do a lot with prepping our clients in terms of like, okay, you're going in, you have to think about what you're asking the judge to do and why. And we want them to be the proactive problem solver. We say, you don't just go in and say, look, Your Honor, they've done all these terrible things, do something. It's more like helping a judge connect the dots to say,
Mm.
okay, I need this very specific thing. Here's what's happened, and here's why this specific solution will fix things. And so judges love it. When you do their job for them, you save them time, you come up with something reasonable, it makes sense. There were times when I would write things and I'd be like, Your Honor, I need this, something like this, and here's why. And a judge twice like just said, I'm signing this into order. And my ex and his attorney got so angry and they're like, she can't do that. Lisa wrote that. How did she do that? And it was like the judge said, I can do what I want to. But what basically I had done was submitted something that made sense to the judge that she could have done herself. And all the math was correct. And it was like, why not? Like, it makes sense. So again, being able to persuade a judge to give you what you need is very, very empowering. And it's a big part of the healing process if you can get it.
Yeah, sounds like an incredible tool for anyone to have in that situation. So I want to just kind of take a little bit of a turn here. Resilience, I'm sure looks different for everyone. Sometimes it's discipline, sometimes it's faith, and sometimes it's just not giving up. During this process of writing these books, what kept you going when life got tough, a little uncertain? Like, how did you keep showing up for yourself?
It has to do with having support, like having other people that I could talk to throughout the process, the court process, the book process. My dad is an identical twin. He and my uncle are 85 years old now, and
Wow.
he's actually an attorney, but he's a patent attorney. So he's never litigated. He doesn't understand family law, but he does speak a little bit of legalese. And so as I was going through this, he was like, this is crazy, and being an attorney, and we have many clients who are attorneys, they're just like, this is nuts. Like, I've never seen anything like this because family court is so different from other courts. So, but having my dad in the background, like, really helped, like, settle me down. Another thing that was super, super helpful was my daughter had a therapist. And I remember over the years, like, I would get so frustrated because I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. And year after year was passing. I'm like, they're not enforcing. Like, how could this still be allowed to happen? And so I went to her therapist one day and said, I think I need a little advice from you. I need help because this is consuming my life. And she said, well, what do you feel is the thing that's really bothering you the most? And I said, I just feel like they're never going to hear my story. Like, it's just never coming out. And she said, how about we try to reframe it as, instead of they're never going to hear me, they haven't heard me yet. And just that word yet was so helpful. And it ended up being true because it was like, okay, it took a number of times, but when they did listen and when I did start getting through, that's when things really started changing and having a lot of impact. And so that word yet, I think, is so important when it comes to getting through something like this. We often tell our clients, it's not that you lose, it's that you give up too soon because you think it's never going to happen. So really remembering that it's a long, hard road and you need people to talk to who truly understand along the way. But if you can hang in there, there's going to be a yet, because nothing is permanent.
That's well put. Yet. So you mentioned earlier, Lisa, that 20 to 22 million people between the US and Canada are in some kind of high conflict divorce. For someone just entering this process, what questions should they ask to make sure they're choosing the right attorney or legal support, especially if the other party is combative or manipulative?
Okay, so just to clarify, that number is people who are dealing with a kid that's turned against them. So the number
Okay.
is a little bit lower, or it's lower for high conflict divorce. That's only about 10% of cases. But back to the initial question about what kinds of questions should you ask a lawyer, getting the right attorney is super, super important. And we have a whole chapter on that in the book about, how to stay sane under insane circumstances. But you want to ask questions. My favorite question, actually, which kind of is twofold, is when you have a consult with that attorney, just know that that's an opportunity not just for you to ask questions, but for them to ask questions. So you want to make sure that they're expressing curiosity about your own situation as well, because this is going to be an intimate relationship. But the best question that you should ask is, how would you handle a case like mine? Because number one, everyone's going to say, yeah, I have experience with divorcing narcissists, because that's a big marketing tool right now. So when you ask a more open-ended question of how would you handle it, you're doing two things. First, you're checking to make sure that they actually paid attention to what you've said. And secondly, you want to know that they actually can deal with it and that they have strategies, because normal divorce is completely different from high conflict divorce. And I'm not just talking about marriage, but like separation, custody battles too, because half our clients have never been married. So if that attorney can like really let you know that they have dealt with things like this before, this is what they usually do in situations like these. Of course, it depends on your case. That should hopefully offer you some comfort, because you need to have someone who truly does understand that cases like these have to be approached very, very differently. Again, most people think you're both going to come to the table, you're going to do what's best for the kids, and you're going to do what's fair. But people like our exes, they don't care about either of those two values. They care about themselves. And so when you're dealing with someone who is completely wrapped up in their own thing, you need to approach everything differently to make them feel like it is all about them. And they do deserve to have a happy life, and they do deserve love and all the other things. And to understand that to make it successful, blaming and accusing them of bad things is only going to make the conflict worse. So you want to figure out ways to lower the level of conflict, which of course is going to affect your children as well, because the higher the conflict, the more the kids suffer. So we need to turn the volume down on the conflict and just get this through as easy as possible. Communication is super important. And trying to keep the peace, not just placating them or doing what they want, but to use tactical empathy to negotiate with them and to get what you and your kids need and get out of there.
Tactical empathy. So it's a strategy. You have to be very strategic and methodical.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully, Carrie, you'll never need any of this information.
My thoughts exactly.
Right.
So we're gonna wrap up here soon, but many of our listeners are, carrying their own stories of rebuilding, some after loss, some after trauma. What would you say to someone who's been meaning to write their book, but maybe they feel stuck, maybe they're afraid or just not ready?
I mean, for me as a writer, I've been writing since I was like 12 years old. I love writing. Journaling is what helped me get through so much of this. So I think realize like no one's forcing you to tell your story. If you want to tell your story, it's very, very helpful to get it out, whether you publish it or not. So you don't need to have some finished, final, amazing book, but just think about how most people, like I said, don't even realize what they're going through and how validating it is to hear and read other people's stories. So know that your story could really save someone's life.
That's well put. Lisa, you've been able to, essentially alchemize your own pain and turn that into purpose. You've built a whole, brand around it, you and your partner. What advice would you give to someone trying to do the same?
So I'm assuming that this person is not going to be building a brand on high conflict divorce, because I'd say with us, with Been There, Got Out, I think it's important to have that radical empathy to deal with it. But that might not be applicable for everyone's situation. I think the most important thing you can do is, let's say you're doing something similar. You're turning your mess into your message, and you want to turn it into a brand. It really starts with remembering who you were when you first started, because that's what you need to speak to. That's your avatar, is someone that's earlier along than you are. So really staying connected to that part of yourself. And that's why it is so important to write stuff down while you're going through it, because it keeps you in touch with who you were at that point. Those are the people that need you. And so the farther along you are, you can just keep, even if you're just a little bit ahead of them, you can keep leading them into like a better place. So make sure you always stay connected with the person you were at the beginning before you reached whatever the transformation was that made you want to turn it into a business.
Just a reminder to stay grounded as you soar up. I like that.
Yeah.
So I kind of have this tradition where I like to end the show with something I call the final chapter. If you could If you could leave one piece of encouragement with our listeners today, something that they'll take long after the episode, what would it be?
I think back to when I was at the tail end of my marriage. I actually had started a book sale for our library. And part of what I did was go to different people's houses and collect their book donations. And I remember going to someone's home. It was an older couple. The woman had called to donate her husband's books. And when I got there, he was very like, no, I don't want to get rid of my books. And she was trying to comfort him. And then she turned to me and apologized and said, I'm really sorry, but he's changed his mind, and I just love him so much. And I just don't want to, make it harder for him right now because he's also sick. And I remember, like, I don't care about the book thing, but I went up and sat in my car and cried because I thought, like, I will never have love like that. Like, my husband we don't have something like that. And I felt like I made a commitment to this marriage and that no matter what, I had to stay in it. And so, eventually things did become obviously more painful that than it was that I had to go rather than stay. It got to that point. And after I got out, like I was so scared. My ex used to say, like, if you divorce me, you're gonna destroy the family and the kids' lives are gonna be ruined. And he used that to keep me there. And I believed it because I was keeping things to myself and I was isolated emotionally. But when I finally made that decision, and that took a couple of years, um, it was so much better. And then I met the love of my life in middle age, and we've now been together 10 and a half years. And it's just like it's so scary before making a big change like this. And you think of all the reasons why you can't do it. But once you take that leap, it's going to be rough for a while, but you'll look back and you'll be like, I am so glad I did it. Like, I saved my life. Things are different for my kids. I look younger. I'm healthier. Like, everything is much, much better. So just know that, like, the scariest things, sometimes you just have to do them because it's meant to be.
Mhm. That's such a good reminder. Lisa, I just want to thank you for the courage and clarity you bring to such a difficult topic. Um, where can people find your book and follow your journey?
Super easy. So our book is, all of our books are called Been There, Got Out as the initial title, and that's our company's name, Been There, Got Out. Our website's beentheregotout.com. We're on social media. Instagram's my home base. We're called Been There, Got Out there too, with little underscores between. We have a podcast and a YouTube channel, and the book's on Amazon. We have courses. Just Google Been There, Got Out, and you'll find us. And it's just me and Chris. So if you write Lisa at Been There, Got Out, like, I will answer you.
Awesome, Lisa. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to following your work. You all are doing some incredible stuff out there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Resilient Author Podcast. I hope today's conversation gave you both inspiration and practical tools for your own journey. If you've been carrying the idea for a book, but haven't started, or you started and feel stuck, I'd love to invite you to join my 5-day Speak Your Book Challenge. In just 5 days, you'll speak the outline of your first draft and discover how to turn it into a finished manuscript and a published book. You can join anytime at voicetobook.co/challenge. Until next time, keep going, stay resilient, and remember, your story matters.